showdown. Now the ultimate Octagon Insider, Sean and Tristan Ducross.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Sports Warriors with your boys Sean and Tristan Ducross. We are finally back after a little bit of R&R for us. After a lot of you probably have known, is that we had some family stuff that we had to take care of. But in the meantime, we are back.
Long overdue, as you can see at the title of the show.
Oh, absolutely. And in the meantime, because it is long overdue, the one thing that isn't going to change is that we have real talk, real opinions. Why not start off with what's going on right now in the UFC, bro?
And you know what? You couldn't have been more right, Tristan. UFC's change is coming. And quite frankly, one thing that has stood out about you and I is that, like you said, real opinions, real talk. Ruffle a lot of feathers, piss off a lot of people. People will tell us, oh, you don't know a lot. But yet, when things come up, it's like, dude, we said that first. But you know what? But first, before we get into that, I wanted to say, hey, as you can see, we're repping our boys from Fightbook MMA. Thank you, Roberto, for the shirts. Thank you for the continuous support from that community through our personal times as well. But one thing that has never changed and will not change is what I just said. But UFC will change, and it is changing, as they released or fired one of their VPs and their marketing director from UFC Asia. They have let go their guy from Toronto in the same position. So it leads to believe that changes are looming. What's to come? That's the biggest question here. And people say, oh, stop talking about UFC. Talk about everything else. But one thing we do differently when we talk about UFC is we dig deep into what UFC ticks. We don't just talk about UFC to talk about UFC. We talk about UFC to let everybody know on a global perspective about UFC, good, bad, or indifferent. And this is going to be no different. And when you look at UFC's issues with their releasing in UFC Asia, the thing that got to me was they're not necessarily letting go of people to let go of people. From what I saw, everybody's like, oh my God, UFC is firing X, Y, and Z and doing this and that. They're going under. Well, here's something that's a little bit different. Here's a little bit of a different spin for this moment. UFC Asia has let go their VP and marketing director. 2 months ago, they let go Mark Fisher, a VP and managing director as well, from the China office. You notice something? Then you look at earlier yesterday, UFC Toronto. They went ahead and released Tom Wright, who was the VP and then the GM of operations.
And
again,
think about this.
The same positions.
There you go. They were very much taken back by the WME IMG company that bought the UFC. They ran into an issue when they took it over. And we're going to also dig a little bit deeper here, too, because we're going to dig a little bit more deeper about the debt issues that everybody sees this $4 billion mark. And you're like, oh, my God, they spent $4 billion. But not so fast. The UFC, so they killed off mostly everybody that's in Toronto.
Except for two people.
Right? But
Why?
what I'm getting out of this is that here's a company that bought out. They had a lot of debt. They had a lot of issues that a lot of people weren't fully aware of. By that is that there were a lot of people that were signed on the dotted line that were doing the exact same job that like you can do at your other job. There are multiple positions, duplicate positions that they felt like that. Well, why are we going to have this guy if this guy's doing his job? Why do we need multiple people doing the same person's job?
Absolutely.
So they're cutting all that overlap, all that same redundant stuff, and they're cutting it.
And you saw that firsthand when you and I, when we worked with Sport Chalet. our other job outside of this, is we saw that when we were bought out. When we were bought out, what happened? You merged the companies and you merged the personnel. If they were underneath the same umbrella of what you did, they merged them and got rid of one and got rid of the other. They kept who they felt was in the best position for success. That's all UFC or WMEIMG, that's a mouthful and a half, is doing here. They're strategically placing people to try to better position themselves for the global market. I believe is that you cut back on certain things, you make more money. But the one I did not get is the releasing of Tom Wright from the UFC Toronto office. If you're talking about doing what's right for the business, or you talk about what's the next best step for the company, Tom Wright is that guy. Because of the fact that he was the guy that spearheaded to get MMA legalized in Toronto. He was the one that got them into Australia. And you're the ones that goes ahead and gets rid of this guy. The guy that got you into two big markets that you couldn't get into without his help.
But see, and now a lot of people are talking about, okay, well, what's next? What's going on with all the layoffs? Well, let's put this in perspective, okay? You can read all the posts, you can read all the news articles, you can talk about what the UFC is saying against what reality actually is. You're probably going to look at about, each week you're looking at about 60 to 80 people being laid off. There might be more that will be coming down the pipe sooner rather than later. But in the midst of all this, a lot of people are failing to understand the substantial layoffs that are going to affect the UFC fighters. Because again, when you have a plethora of fighters that are underneath the contract, that not a lot of them get the fights that they deserve or that they need to put food on their table, WMEIMG sees that. They see that as a way to cut costs. So fighters will start to be released from their contracts after all the layoffs and all the stuff that all the dust is settled. Fighters will start to be laid off, will start to get their pink slips due to the fact that, again, I'm telling you guys, this debt issue that nobody wants to talk about is far deeper than what anybody could ever expect. Because we were the ones a couple months back, Fightbook can attest to this, everybody on the MMA community that knows the Sports Warriors can attest to this, is that we broke down the nitty-gritty about their debt crisis. Remember that?
Yeah, when we said they're going to be bought out. And people said, no, they're not going to be bought out.
It's not going to be a full buyout. It's only going to be half a buyout. Fast forward till now, it was a full buyout. We were the guys that dove so far deep that we broke down every single financial backing. We broke down every single thing in terms of debt creditors and what it meant. The fact that you immediately had a lien put on your business, that means you were up for sale and a full sale. By doing so, they put themselves in a issue that where now their finances are going to start coming out a little bit more. They were a $1.8 billion in debt?
1.4.
$1.4 billion in debt, folks. Put that in writing, okay?
And when you look at it, is that we'll get to the financial issues here, but let's just talk about the issues that we're looking at in the past 48 hours. The releasing of upper tier management and saying that it's going to trickle down to Zuffa or not Zuffa now, but UFC in Las Vegas. There's more to come in Las Vegas.
The headquarters are going to see some people getting their heads chopped off too.
So it's interesting. And then you look at Singapore. When UFC Asia debuted in Singapore, they drew $1.2 million. They only had 5,000 fans attend. They could hardly cover costs of staging and flying of officials. But wait, people didn't know that. People barely knew about UFC Asia. But here, they could barely cover costs. I'm waiting for our boys over at MMA Madhouse as well as Fightbook to say, really? UFC couldn't cover costs? I'm waiting to hear something from those two regarding this. That could set off a whole nother time bomb, right? So, to close that down doesn't surprise me. What surprises me was that WMEIMG, still a mouthful to say every time. But 3 months ago, they took over. And in that 3 months, they said they have no plans to close down any international offices. But yet they have closed down the China office back in April 2 months ago. Really? Confused by that, right? When UFC was bought for $4 billion, they were in trouble. It is to the point that in order for WMEIMG to purchase UFC, they didn't have the full $4 billion. They also had to borrow $1.8 million to be able to finalize
The sell.
the sale. But, oh wait!
Everybody doesn't buy that. Because it's the UFC.
But here's the kicker. Now let's dive a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of the financials. Okay? To continue to prove our point that Zuffa was in trouble, Zuffa LLC took out a loan of $425 million back in 2015. That loan, from what is the rumblings through everything, is the fact that they took out that loan in order to purchase Pride, WEC, and Strikeforce, which put them into debt. Why would you go buy something you knew you didn't have the money to do it? Explain that to me. Why would you risk putting yourself into financial hardship to try to move out other competition? Why would you do that? Because remember, in 2009, I think is what it was, UFC was being sued by the antitrust laws.
Yep.
Because of the monopoly they were putting on competition by the purchases of these three.
What? No.
You forgetting that. It boggles my mind. I was talking to Fightbook before we went on air about this, was that why do we sweep everything underneath the rug when it comes to the UFC?
Because of 3 letters. 3 letters. UFC.
You don't hear about anything from Bellator, World Series of Fighting.
Although they have their own financial issues.
Yes, but you don't hear it. The only other organization you have heard about having financial issues is ding, 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 the Titan FC.
Right.
And who are they bought underneath the umbrella of? They were underneath the umbrella of
company
of UFC. Notice how who has financial hardship? UFC.
It's because, Sean, they continue to put themselves out there when you're developing no superstars. You are putting out subscriptions that, okay, that's another issue too, is with the UFC subscription network, is that they're not making their subscription quotas like they thought they would be.
No, because
WWE, get this, WWE subscription, WWE Network is beating UFC's network by a whopping total of 25% more subscribers than the UFC network. That's an issue in itself. So what does WMEIMG's ultimate game plan to get subscribers to the UFC network? Oh, well, we're no longer going to just televise fights on the network. We're going to create original programming.
Again, who does that sound like? WWE goes to their own W network and says, guess what? This is how you can get all your fights all your wrestle matches, all you want is on demand. All you got to do is sign up for, what is it, $10.99? And you get NXT. You get the WWE Network pay-per-views that are just for the WWE Network. Go figure.
But even you get WrestleMania, their biggest pay-per-view, on the WWE Network.
So, of course, naturally, UFC creates the UFC Fight Pass.
And then here we go. So now we start seeing who WME is and what their ultimate game plan is. Changes will be coming forth quicker rather than sooner. Sooner rather than later, because for the simple fact that WME went to the celebrities who are fans of the sport, and they asked them simply, "Hey, do you want to be a backer in the ownership of the UFC?" A lot of them, like Ben Affleck, Conan O'Brien,
and right there,
a whole bunch of people decided that yes, we will be backing them.
And that hits the other portion of this. Is the fact is that when you're so far in debt, you've got to seek out other ways to try to up your revenue by any means you can. And when you go ahead and you look at this, $4.1 billion is what UFC was bought out for. Let me break it down for you. $1.4 billion in debt. $500 million planned debt. $400 million in debt equity. $1.75 million in cash. The total sell, $4.1 billion. Then you take away $460 million of that in existing debt, makes the sell actual $3.6 billion. If you take away all the debt that WMEIMG actually paid for, they actually only paid $1.75 billion for the UFC. Boom! Where is the natural sell of $4.1 billion?
Because they had to pay everything, and by accumulating all the debt and everything, it came out to that. But the realization is, it was only worth 1.7.
And want to know what's interesting? This company, Zuffa, before it was bought out by WMEIMG, they were originally a BB minus credit rating.
Yep.
Then they made it up to a BB credit rating. If you look on the credit rating structure, that puts them back in the middle of the game. In the middle. Not near the top, not near the bottom. But when you're Zuffa and you're making as much money as they are, how do they only have a middle of the road rating? That raises a red flag to me. Then when you look at WMEIMG buying out UFC,
Yep.
they went back down to a BB minus credit rating. They went right back down to where they originally started with the credit rating. So there's something that's being missed. There's something that is not being told to everybody out there right now.
Yeah, because everybody wants to hide something.
It makes you wonder what is left, and for them to say, you know what? We've got Conan O'Brien creating his own themed segment.
MMA segment on Conan O'Brien's show. Oh. Because he's one of the backers for the UFC, so he's going to do his part in promoting the UFC to make them mainstream. So by doing so on his talk show, he's going to create a MMA themed segment.
That to me is just getting desperate, but you're trying to use the value of certain celebrities that are backing you to try to get more money and more publicity thrown your way.
Here's another thing,
just
Sean.
leaves you scratching your head.
Right, because here's another thing. WMEIMG is planning to include new programming, planning on having these so-called celebrity backers to now go out of their way to promote the UFC to make it more mainstream. With Conan O'Brien, Ben Affleck's going to do a little bit of something for them too. But they also want some kind of crossover appeal, which is why
WWE,
Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey are all being a focus point right now because they want to be able to grab a hold of them that has the enthusiasm, the charisma. They want to be able to take them and plant them into movies, TV shows, talk shows,
WWE,
etc., to make them more mainstream.
WWE.
Doesn't John Cena do that for the WWE?
WWE.
So that's where we are heading with the WME-IMG buyout of the UFC. So many changes are coming, and I can only expect that 2017 is going to see a drastic, almost, I want to say, not a complete rebrand of what the UFC is, but a lot of these so-called fans or other talk shows that follow the UFC and stuff like that, you're going to witness something so different in the coming years that is either going to ruffle feathers of people or you're going to accept it. That's the way it's going. People wanted to be more mainstream. Well, I'm sorry, folks. This is the way that you make a sport mainstream. That is, remember, that was formerly known as human cockfighting. So once we start trying to eliminate that stigma, that even still to this day and age, there's still people that gravitate the UFC or mixed martial arts, for that matter, into that category. So now we are getting what many people didn't want to see, but claimed they wanted to see it mainstream.
This is what happens when UFC, Zuffa, WMEIMG, and everybody else gets, when in reality of it is that you're trying to be bigger than what you actually are. We've seen it time and time again. We've talked about it time and time again with all of our boys, is that MMA is not made for mainstream commercial.
No, because you're just going to water down a product that was so barbaric and that many people thought it wouldn't even make it to this day, is here, is part of the worldwide sports world. And now basically everything that they have built on, everything that they have created, in my eyes, you're just going to spit on it.
Pretty close to it. And that's what the issue is.
To me, there's so much more pride into mixed martial arts and combat fighting. And the way that I see this going, it baffles me.
Mixed martial arts, whether it's jiu-jitsu, wrestling,
right,
karate, whatever it may be, one thing that they all have in common is respect. That's what they have. They respect each other. They respect the sport that they're competing in. UFC is disrespecting the name of mixed martial arts.
The three letters
they're trying
that actually do mean something is called MMA. Not UFC. You don't train UFC, bro. You train MMA.
And when you look at it and you're disrespecting it on so many different levels just to try to get to where we are. When we've talked to Chris Cope basically said it too, was that they're making money on the backs and the sweat and the blood of the guys that were the predecessors to the fight game to begin with. The Ken Shamrocks, the Frank Shamrocks,
the Royce Gracies,
the Pat Militiches. Those guys of the world. Put UFC on the map. We're forgetting about the lineage. We're forgetting about everything. That was the one interesting thing about when TNA first started. It had lineages back to NWA. They didn't forget the past. They embraced the past. UFC is not embracing the past. They're not embracing the evolution of the fight game.
Remember, they were the ones that pushed Art Davie out the door.
They're trying to get to where the WWE is with real fighting. You've got so much animosity in this fight game that I've talked about it for years. When we grew up, even occasionally when I first started dating my wife, and we talked about TV, and we talked about kids, and we talked about stuff growing up. One thing you and I always spoke about when you're watching about it, when violent video games came on, and that was all the array when all those mass shootings were happening and everything else was going on. It wasn't about what was going on the TV that was driving those kids to do what they did. It was because of the lack of parenting to get the point across that that's not real. That's not for you to go do that. That's where we're still at with mixed martial arts, is that families and parents don't want their kids to see people get beat up for a living.
But yet we're trying to tell people that MMA, mixed martial arts, combat sports, is okay.
It is. It is within context. But it's no different than watching boxing and getting people beat up every day. It's no different than watching wrestlers take serious bumps over and over. It's no different. The only thing is that you may see blood here, blood there. It's really no difference. It's how, as a parent,
how do you raise your kids?
How do you change that perception?
Right. It's not up to the mixed martial arts fighters to change the perception of what families think about their product. But one thing that is being brought up in the chat room right now is, where will Bellator, WSOF end up after all this UFC sales stuff is finally officially done? WSOF is an interesting player in all of this, I think, because WSOF financially does not have the real stability like a Bellator with Viacom. They don't have the real stability of what UFC and WME IMG has right now. WSOF already canceled 2 shows,
which we'll get to a little bit later.
Right. So I think that right now WSOF needs to be pushed out to the burner and let them be them, let them do them. Bellator, I think this is great for Bellator, because I talked to one of the fighters over there, one of our boys, Virgil Zwicker, and he was like, I don't know what direction Bellator is going, because you go after washed up fighters, push guys that aren't even around, leave guys that have been loyal to the company, waiting for a fight. So I look at it as a double-edged sword, because I see that come the end of all this, there will be fighters looking for a job, and I think more people are going to be going over to Bellator just because of the mainstream popularity. I just don't see a lot of people jumping ship to Asia or Europe, even though money-wise they might be able to financially back a lot of these guys. I just don't see it as a viable option at this point. A lot of people talk about the structure of mixed martial arts back east and in Europe, that that things are going to change the landscape. Let's just put your money where your mouth is and let's see what happens. But we have more UFC news. You're listening to the Sports Warriors with your boys Sean and Tristan Cross. We are also going to talk about who is or isn't hitting the free agent open market, which is interesting in itself, and a world champion calls out a former world champion. How these two tie into each other, stay right here. The Sports Warriors will be right back.
You are watching the Cross Brothers, the Sports Warriors, right here on YouTube. You can catch us every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can check us out at our website, www.thehotspotshow.com. Or you can just follow us on Facebook at Ducross Brothers. You can find us also on Facebook at Sean and Tristan Ducross. So, stay up with us. Keep up. Real talk, real opinions, the only way combat sports should be done.
All right, everybody, we are back. We are the Sports Warriors. Real talk, real opinions, right here on the mixed martial arts and combat sports world. I'm Tristan Cross. Along my side, as always, is my partner in crime, the one and only Sean Ducross. Sean, we just smashed UFC out of the ballpark with their UFC issues. That's over and done with. But
real talk, real opinions. People are going to hate, but people are going to love us at the same time.
Cool. You're right.
We're not afraid.
No, heck no. Ain't afraid.
10 years in doing this, not afraid. I mean, one thing we were always taught through the grapevine that when we were coming up and we were starting in the radio business is one thing you got to be able to have is be able to have thick skin and be able to take criticism.
And also, how many haters can we get? Because they're talking about us. So,
good, bad, or indifferent.
Right, love us, hate us, but that's kind of the relationship that GSP, George St. Pierre, has with the UFC right now. Did he get out of his contract? Is he still under contract? If you talk to the spin doctor himself, Mr. Dana White, he'll tell you the latter. That, my friend, will be that GSP is still under contract.
But if you ask GSP in his camp, he's not under contract. It's going to be one of those things that is going to be remained. Everybody's going to be watching very closely to see how
this all plays out.
Transpires. Because as I was going through this and trying to figure out where this whole thing came up, so on MMA Hour, GSP announced he was a free agent. His contract has been terminated. UFC then released a statement. GSP is still under contract. He has not fought since 2013. Jim Quinn said about this issue regarding GSP, he feels that I suppose they could take legal steps against that or they could offer a new contract. There's so many different variables. That's true. Because there was discussion about re-signing GSP or extending his contract. Because the issues that stem with GSP wasn't about his unwillingness to come back and fight for the UFC. It was his unwillingness to change his contract that he had with the UFC since 2011. Where in that time frame, there was no Reebok deal. He has great sponsorship with Hayabusa. Why would he want to go anywhere else and lose his sponsorships where he's going to make more money than he would underneath the Reebok deal? That was a sticking point about why he never wanted to come back, because they needed to agree to those terms of whatever the contract may be. Because it sounds to me is that if GSP were to come back, it would be underneath the stipulation that Reebok and Hayabusa would be 1A and 1B in terms of him being able to wear his gi and wear his other Hayabusa sponsorships. Yep. So that was a sticking point, because in 2014, a year after he stepped away, Reebok deal was announced. Then it became, well, I can't come back unless you meet these terms. I guess over the course of the last couple months, the ball was starting to roll a little bit more. Is GSP coming back? You heard him say, you know what? I'm tempted to come back. I'm tempted to fight. All this, that, and the other. So you look further, and you see that his attorney, Eric Hochstat, sorry if I'm butchering it a little bit, and his camp gave UFC an ultimatum. Here's a 10-day deadline. Get me a fight. You get me a fight, I'll sign that contract, I'll come back and fight. UFC waited until the 11th and a half hour, if you will, before they emailed GSP's camp a letter that simply just had one name attached to it.
No phone call. No, hey, bud, how you doing? Let's talk. Nothing like that. An email that had one player's name on it.
And all it was Robbie Lawler. Robbie Lawler. That's it. No dates. No other options for a fight. No venue. No rounds. All it said was Robbie Lawler. Now you look back at GSP saying, well, I didn't want to do that fight because of the fact that, what, didn't Robbie Lawler just pulled out of a fight against Donald Cerrone? So he was led to believe he was injured. So if he signed on that contract to fight Robbie Lawler for unknown timetable,
right.
venue, rounds, whatever it may be.
Nothing ironclad, nothing.
Basically, it was UFC hook, line, and sinker. Going out there, catching the big fish in the ocean, getting them underneath a contract, no real fight. Guess what? You can't go anywhere. It was a smart, strategic attempt, but then again, it goes along the lines of the parallel. Again, when it was posted, I made my references like I've been doing for the last month and a half, people. I feel like Steve Austin.
It's Sean 316 says
or the what gimmick that he did for a while is that this had eerie similarities to what happened when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash left WWE and created the NWO. It was Scott Hall who left and brought over Kevin Nash and then took over Hulk Hogan. Benson Henderson broke that mold and went to Bellator.
Then you had
Matt Mitrione, who broke that mold and went over.
McDonald
broke that mold and went over.
So would it surprise you if the man, GSP, all of a sudden shows up on Bellator TV?
Just saying. The parallels are there. It's being drawn in the sand about what's to come and what's going to happen.
I still remember when we were covering Bellator and all of a sudden we started seeing a lot of red and blue, remember?
Yep.
And my brother and I, we were like, dude, no, this can't be happening. And I remember sitting at our media table, and when we first spoke to Jimmy Smith, we looked at him, remember? We looked at him and said, so, Scott Coker coming? Like, oh, what do you mean? Well, because we're noticing that a lot of red and blue is showing up. And a lot of red and blue was from what? What company?
Strikeforce.
And then all of a sudden we started digging a little bit deeper in our context, and all of a sudden we found out what? That Scott Coker was out of his contract by midnight. And at what time did Scott Coker sign his contract with Bellator? 12:01. What time was Bjorn Remney was released of his duties? 12:01. Now you fast forward to GSP's situation, I can guarantee you that Scott Coker's on that phone with GSP's agent, and GSP be like, dude, if this is legit,
I will offer you
the world.
I will offer you $1 million to be my middleweight guy at Bellator.
You don't understand that he is the biggest name in combat sports. And make no mistake about it, Scott Coker is on that phone. He's texting the agent.
He is Steve Borden, aka Sting of mixed martial arts.
He is the icon of the icon.
When Sting became a free agent, WWE came knocking.
Yep.
Then Sting developed the moniker of the Crow gimmick, where he perched himself up in the rafters and just watched everything. GSP is sitting back watching everything unfold and going, the ball's in my court, not yours. I've got everything I ever wanted, and when I come back, it's going to be on my own terms.
Isn't that the truth, though? Like, you are such a name and such a value to a company that you literally could be sitting on a chair like you're the Joker in Batman, sitting in the thing, just laughing and giggling. Because this is absolutely hysterical. Because you got a spin doctor in one corner, and you got GSP sit back. Like, dude, I know what my contract says. You can say whatever you want.
And you know,
but the reality is there's no sticking point.
And Fightbook says that $1 million contract plus sponsorships. You know, if GSP gets that money, you know Conor McGregor is going to go bananas.
Well, it's funny because Robbie Lawler says that, and this bugs me too, as a fighter, and I know many fighters that probably agree to this, is that if you don't put a money on it, don't put a ring on it, You as a fighter, Sean, have every right to say yes or no to any contract. Robbie Lawler says that GSP had a stupid, and I quote, ridiculous number in his head that made him delusional. And that came out to the fact that Robbie Lawler claims, you're talking about $1 million in sponsorships, he claims that GSP says that he would only fight for $10 million plus sponsorships. There's the money. Like, that is the dumbest thing anybody could say about another fighter. Because I doubt any fighter would say, give me $10 million and I'll fight. Because Conor McGregor, who makes money, who sells pay-per-views, ain't worth that kind of money. So don't get it twisted that our boy, GSP, wants $10 million. That's absurd to think that a fighter of GSP's caliber is willing to take that. There is no way any fighter would even say, give me $10 million. If Conor McGregor doesn't say, give me $10 million. Like, that's just preposterous. That's just downright idiotic of Robbie Lawler to even say. And he says, well, pony up and fight me at what, 207? 206?
206.
Like, dude, if you're trying to paint this guy with a black eye, for what? For your benefit? Because you're the poster boy for the UFC? What do you get out of it? Like, I'm trying to figure this out. What does a company like UFC get out of bashing one of their poster boys for years? And George St. Pierre till now. What do you get out of that?
It's because you're trying to hold all the cards. You're trying to keep everything in line. You're trying to keep everything in perspective. You're trying to hold all the cards.
Right? I get that. But to what point does it put in a black eye on a premier athlete and a premier fighter like George St. Pierre is okay?
The WWE did it when you had Scott Hall and Kevin Nash leave. They tried to slam them over and over again for their jump. All it is a media ploy. That's all this is. They want to keep it close to the vest. They want to make sure that if in fact he's out of his contract, by them saying he's still under contract, by blasting him in the media, whatever it may be, it's because of the fact that it'll put Bellator off. And if they can put Bellator off for that split moment, they may be able to get back in there and slide in and keep him underneath contract and go, see, he's still under contract. It's a smart business move. Do we like it? No.
I just think that...
But when you're looking at it, it's a smart thing for the UFC.
Like, we just don't see the respect that fighters so rightfully deserve. And companies to be able to go out of their way to get other people to attack other people, to me it's just ridiculous. Because we know at the end of the day what is being written, what is being said behind closed doors. We are the ones that are the voice of the voiceless. We are putting it out there. We are not afraid to give you exactly the real talk and the real opinions behind what is actually going on. And we are going to just do that right after this break. We are the Sports Warriors. That is Sean Ducross. I'm Tristan Ducross. Ripping our Fightbook MMA t-shirts with our boys. You need to go over to Fightbook MMA. Like the fan page. You also need to get on the Sports Warriors train. Because I'm telling you, we are the realest talk, realest opinion. Ain't nobody going to put us out. We bringing you Bellator 162 preview that a lot of people are sleeping on, and y'all shouldn't be. More with the Sports Warriors, Sean and Tristan Ducross, right here, live, Warriors TV.
watching the Cross Brothers, the Sports Warriors, right here on YouTube. You can catch us every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can check us out at our website, www.thehotspotshow.com, or you can just follow us on Facebook at Ducross Brothers. You can find us also on Facebook at Sean and Tristan Ducross. So, stay up with us. Keep up. Real talk, real opinions, the only way combat sports should be done.
All right, everybody, we are back. We are the Sports Warriors right here on YouTube.tv. We're your boys, Sean and Tristan Ducross, the Sports Warriors. Bellator 162 debuts at puts on a 4-fight main card. That is going to be headlined by the return of Alexander Shlemenko versus the rising of Kendall the Spider Grove.
Apparently he's starting to figure it all out. And when you look at Kendall Grove, he's knocked out 2 fighters in his last 2 fights? Really? That's a little bit of a different side for Kendall Grove.
Because he's finally understand that at 6'6", you need to use your length. Use it. The distance. Ain't nobody going to close that distance on you, especially with your defense that you have.
And when you look at Alexander Shlemenko, the issues that he's had in Bellator in the last 2 of his fights where he actually fought in Bellator and not in Russia because he was serving a suspension was against Brandon Halsley and Tito Ortiz. Both those guys were much physically stronger than he was and imposed their will on him. He struggles to face guys who are a little bit bigger than he is, and Kendall Grove is gigantic compared to the 5'10" Alexander Shlemenko. He has a 6-inch height advantage and a 9-inch advantage. Really?
That's what I'm saying.
Good luck trying to get in. You're going to get slapped silly. You're going to go to Slap City.
This will be Shlemenko's first fight since 2015 when he tested positive for steroids, when he was tested positive 50-1. That was basically as if he shot up right before he went to the ring. Shlemenko has a lot to prove in this. But then Kendall Grove in a weak middleweight division now, he has the opportunity for the first time to go from being a somewhat of a underperformer, could have been a has-been, a gatekeeper, to a guy that could be in the talk for a middleweight title fight.
And that goes to show, though, just how weak that middleweight division is.
Well, since they released Brandon Halsley, there hasn't been really that name guy to continue to push the division.
That's true. But you know how much of a story it would be if Kendall Grove can capture the middleweight title?
Mm-hmm.
Because of the fact that he's gone through trials and tribulations in his life.
And do you understand what that would mean for Hawaii?
Right? It would be great. And so I wish him the best. I hope he continues to trend upward. But then you got Bobby Lashley fighting in the heavyweight division against Josh Appel.
I got to applaud Bellator for making this fight, because this is a actual step up in competition to a degree for Bobby Lashley.
And if I'm Bobby Lashley, I'm a little afraid, quite frankly, because Josh Appel's a veteran of the fight game. He's 12-5. His wins come via knockouts. So this is going to go one of 2 ways. Bobby Lashley may meet his maker and may get knocked out in the first round, or Bobby Lashley may do what Bobby Lashley does. Shoot in, get the takedown, and just beat Josh Appel until the fight is stopped in the first round.
I'm still trying to figure out Bobby Lashley, because I look at Bobby Lashley as a TNA wrestler, and yes, he has some runs as a MMA fighter and looking to get his record to an astonishing 15-2. I look and I see Bobby Lashley as a guy that struggles with his striking, struggles with his grappling, but yet he's a freak of nature when it comes to his wrestling and his wrestling power. Out-muscling guys will only get you so far. Now, is it time for us to start talking about him as a heavyweight contender? I call for pause a little bit, because I want to see him establish himself as a big game fighter, because we don't know about his gas tank. We see his weak striking.
But when you're
we
as
see
big
his
as-
weak, but yet we see how freakish of an athlete he is, and how he can muscle around at 40 years old. How he can simply outmuscle.
Even though the guy looks like he's 20.
Right. That he can simply outmuscle 90% of the heavyweights. That's an amazing feat in itself.
So, here's my next thought, okay? When you look at the fact that Bobby Lashley has an impressive 14-2 record, granted he hasn't fought anybody of real importance in the fight game. This is a step up, I get that. But you've got Czech Congo waiting in the wings for that heavyweight title shot. If or when Bobby Lashley wins this fight, does his next step up come in the shape of Matt Mitrone? Do you put him against Matt Mitrone with the winner goes and fights Czech Congo for the heavyweight title?
See, if I'm Bellator, I am trying to avoid that fight at all costs.
But you can't keep hiding Bobby Lashley.
I understand that. But when you look at Matt Mitrone and the type of power he possesses, and he ain't no slouch and no pushover, I don't see Bobby Lashley's skill level up to that. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because I think that his skill level is enough for Czech Congo. Because Czech Congo, Fear of the Darkness, I see Czech Congo as the type of person that isn't overly exciting, hates facing wrestlers, can't stop a takedown for his life. So I see that as a potential win in the back pocket for Bobby Lashley as a name to his resume. That's the only guy I see, name-wise, in Bellator in the heavyweight division that he can beat. You climb that ladder to Matt Mitrone, you are seriously looking at your third loss in the UFC, in Bellator. It's coming. It's inevitable. You will lose to Matt Mitrone if you don't take MMA seriously.
I think that's when you underestimate Bobby Lashley. Bobby Lashley is one of the most freakiest, physically gifted athletes in MMA.
No question denying that.
And I get that his striking is not near the top level competitors. However, if you at some point can get a takedown as quickly as he can, it negates any type of striking ability anybody else has. So I get you want to protect him.
Right.
But if he could shoot in T-minus 2 seconds and get Matt Mitrone down, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you have faith in your big game fighter that when it's the big game, when it's on the line, he's going to perform?
But we need to see more out of Bobby Lashley. We do. I just think, logically, I just don't see a whole lot happening with him. And then you got Ryan Couture that's on this card, and he's coming off of one of the horrendous knockouts of his career to take on Yamaguchi. And I think that stylistic matchup for both guys that lost, great. Virgil Zwicker versus Dan Charles is going to be a barn burner on the preliminary card.
What about AJ Matthews versus Kato?
Right?
I'm a Mr. Famous for the quote of, I'm a small glove fighter and you're a big game fighter.
Yet, his last claim to fame was his knockout for Joe Schilling.
What happens if he beats AJ Matthews?
I don't see that happening.
Just saying.
Right?
It's going to break Twitter lane.
But Kevin Ferguson Jr. is finally going to debut against Rip Bing.
Apparently he's got power upon power.
More so than his father.
That's freaky.
And he has more skill than his father, and that's downright scary.
But when you talk about skill level, and you talk about everything else, Bellator is good on paper. Got exciting fights that whether people want to believe it or not. But you can't forget, Lion Fight 32 goes down in Las Vegas October 22nd.
With a new main event!
Malapet versus Joe Nadawa.
Who took the fight on 48 hours notice.
That's how freakishly these guys are when it comes to being ready and on the go and being so talented for Muay Thai.
Dude, fighters want to fight. Period.
And that's what it comes down to. And Muay Thai fighters from Thailand fight so often and so much, it is ridiculous.
But let's wish Tyler Hollenbeck,
Kai
Hollenbeck. Let's wish him well, because he tore his ACL, and that's why this fight, the Hollenbeck versus Malapet, is not happening.
And this is still for a title. This is still for the middleweight title. Unfortunately, Kyle Hollenbeck was stripped of the title, I guess you could say, due to his injury. So it's now Malapet versus Joe Nadawa. If you are looking for the best of the best,
dude, the fight of the year of combat sports, it's going to go down at Line Fight 32.
We've seen Joe Nadawa destroy legs. We've seen Malapet stand there, laugh at fighters, and still keep coming. If you have never watched a Muay Thai fight,
you're sleeping.
You're going to want to watch this one, because this one is going to be one for the ages.
Dude, I even think that the return of Rami Anza versus Ming Freeman is a fight of the night caliber as well. Because Denza is coming back from, remember the last time we saw him, he had a comeback win when he split Daniel McGowan's lip from Timbuktu that sent the mouth guard into the audience, and they stopped the fight. Adenza coming back to fight Ming Freeman, who is a freak in himself, is coming after he knocked out, finished the fight against Jason Andrade. So can he keep the momentum going and get into the ranks here?
I don't know. We talk about Lion Fight a lot, and we talk about how Muay Thai is exciting. You just got to give it some time. And Lion Fight has got its legs underneath them. They're putting on more intriguing and enticing fights where you're going to see people get hurt. You're going to see some elbows flying. And one guy that stands out is that Gabriel Mazzotti. He is 19 years old, 11-2 already in the sport. Facing a guy named Josh Shepard, who's 4-1. Gabriel Mazzotti has already fought for the King's Cup, made it all the way to the semifinals, and in that fight, in that tournament, he had a highlight reel knockout of a leg kick. Then in the next round, in the semifinals when he lost, he tried to go for the knockout because he was losing in the fight, and he had nothing left to lose, so he went for broke. He didn't make it to the final, but you look at it, and that's what happened. But 19 years old, this kid's already made a name for himself. That's impressive. When you fight for the King's Cup, then he comes back after the loss to claim the WMC South American title via another leg kick. So, you look at it. Oh, in the actual King's Cup, he ended his first fight with an elbow. I forgot that. The leg kick was when he won the WMC South American title. So this kid has highlight reel finishes. He'll finish you with an elbow, or he'll come back and kick you and end you with a leg kick.
Absolutely.
This kid is phenomenal in terms of what he's able to do. But Josh Shepard is built like a brick.
We also have to talk about, real quick, is that Kendrick Latchman makes his pro debut on Lion Fight. And he is on a 4-1 streak in his last 5 fights. You can't ask for much more. Super bantamweight title. I mean, not title. Super bantamweight fight. It's going to be fast and furious. No pun intended. And that fight alone is going to be exciting. So, Lion Fight 32, the build is incredible for this card.
I just wish we could have been there.
Right.
And we were talking to Scott Kemp before.
Right.
We wish we could have been there. But we wish the team of Lion Fight good luck with this exciting fight. We also wish WSOF good luck as we start to head out here. Is that they canceled 2 shows. World Series of Fighting 34, November 12th. World Series 35, December 3rd. Many people thought it was because of financial issues. I disagree. I think it was a smart strategic play by Ray Sefo and WSOF because November 12th was going against UFC 205
Not just that, is
in Madison Square Garden. So you knew you were probably going to lose out on that.
not just that, they really wanted to bolster the New York card because they only have 10 live fights on the on their NBC contract. So by default, they had to think, okay, we're going into our last couple of fights here underneath NBC, which is heading to the new year. We need to renegotiate our contract with NBC. So strategically, I think this is a great play for them.
It is,
because
they
you put all your chips in one basket, and you say we are going to blow the roof off the theater at Madison Square Garden, and you're going to do something that will benefit your brand in the near future, because they need leverage to talk to NBC, because they want to talk to NBC about upping the amount of live events, because right now they have 10 live events with NBC. 2 global live events. They want to update that to 18 live events on NBC.
So see, I think it was a smart strategic play. It had nothing to do with financial ability. It was
Although Justin Gaethje will tell you otherwise. He says that they can't pay him to fight more than twice a year.
When you're as good as he is, I mean, that's a different topic for a different day. But you know what? That's all we have.
In the meantime, we are out of here. We are the Ducross Brothers, Sports Warriors. I'm Tristan Ducross. Alongside is my brother, Sean Ducross. You can hit us up on our Facebook, Sean and Tristan Ducross. You can also like our fan page, The Ducross Bros. Check out our website, www.thehotspot.show.com. Twitter, @The Ducross Bros.
If you really want to talk about MMA, you can join us on Fightbook MMA's fan page. Talk to us. Talk to them about Fightbook.
Go to fightbookmma.com.
You can also check out our stuff over there as well.
Absolutely. Until next time, we are out.